If you enjoy stories about the incredible impact teachers can have on their students' lives, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Today's story reveals how one dedicated educator's classroom project left Steve Harvey speechless and inspired millions across America. In classrooms across America, teachers work quietly every day to change lives, often without recognition or reward. But occasionally, their impact becomes visible in ways that astonish everyone. During what seemed like a routine episode of Family Feud, middle school teacher Miss Abigail Chen revealed a project her students had undertaken that was so extraordinary it caused Steve Harvey to completely lose his composure. What began as a simple question about teaching evolved into a powerful demonstration of how young people, when guided by a passionate educator, can transform their community and challenge our assumptions about what children are capable of achieving. The episode started like any other Family Feud taping at the Atlanta studios in April 2024. The Chen family from Baltimore was facing off against the Thompsons from Denver. Both families had won their initial rounds and were now competing in a pivotal match that would determine who advanced to fast money. The Chen family included Abigail Chen, a 3-4-year-old middle school science teacher at Westside Community School in Baltimore, her husband David, her parents, and her younger brother. Throughout the earlier rounds, Steve had engaged in his usual friendly banter with the contestants, learning bits about their lives and professions. When Steve discovered Abigail was a teacher, he had expressed genuine respect. "Teachers don't get nearly enough credit," he told her during an early exchange. "You're shaping the future every single day." Abigail had smiled appreciatively but modestly deflected the praise. "The kids do all the real work," she had replied. "I just guide them in the right direction." As the game progressed, the Chen family demonstrated impressive chemistry, communicating effectively and supporting each other through both correct and incorrect answers. They held a slight lead when they reached a pivotal question that would dramatically change the tone of the show. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced, looking at his card. "Name something teachers often spend their own money on for their classrooms." David Chen, Abigail's husband, answered first. "School supplies." "Show me school supplies," Steve called out, and the board revealed it as the top answer. The Chen family chose to play rather than pass, and the round continued with predictable answers. "Books, decorations, snacks for students." When it came back to Abigail's turn, she hesitated slightly before answering. "Laboratory equipment." Steve looked surprised. "Laboratory equipment? That's pretty specific." Abigail nodded confidently. "Science teachers know." The board showed science divided by lab materials as the fifth answer, and the Chen family continued their successful streak. As they accumulated points, Steve's curiosity about Abigail's teaching experience grew. During a brief pause in filming while the production team reset for the next question, Steve approached Abigail. "So you teach middle school science?" he asked conversationally. "Yes, 7th and 8th grade," Abigail confirmed. "That's a tough age," Steve remarked. "What made you choose middle school?" Abigail's face lit up at the question. Most people think middle schoolers are just awkward and difficult, but they're at this amazing stage where they're starting to see bigger possibilities in the world. They're old enough to tackle real problems, but young enough that they haven't learned to be cynical yet. Something in her passionate response caught Steve's attention. "Real problems? What kind of real problems are your students tackling?" Abigail hesitated, seemingly unsure whether to elaborate in this setting. "Well, we've been working on the significant project this year." "Tell me about it," Steve encouraged, genuinely interested. What Abigail revealed next would transform a routine game show exchange into something extraordinary. "Our school is in a part of Baltimore that's considered a food desert," Abigail began, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Many of our students rely on school meals as their primary source of nutrition. During COVID, when schools closed, we realized how vulnerable they were." Steve nodded, listening intently as the studio audience quieted. "After we returned to in-person learning, my students wanted to do something about it. It started with a simple science lesson about plant growth, but it evolved into something much bigger." The director, sensing something significant unfolding, signaled for the cameras to keep rolling, despite the break in official taping. The production team rarely captured these between-round conversations, but something about this exchange warranted documentation. My 8th graders designed and built a hydroponic garden in our classroom, Abigail continued. They researched the most nutritionally dense vegetables that could grow in limited space with minimal resources. They calculated optimal light exposure, nutrient solutions, and growth rates. That's impressive, Steve remarked. A classroom garden. Abigail shook her head. It was just the beginning. When they saw their first harvest, one of my students, Darnell, asked a question that changed everything. He said, "Miss Chen, what if we could do this on a bigger scale? What if we could help feed our community?" Steve's expression shifted as he began to grasp the magnitude of what Abigail was describing. These 13 and 14-year-olds, Abigail continued, her voice reflecting both pride and disbelief, wrote a proposal for the vacant lot next to our school. They researched zoning laws, drafted budgets, and created presentation materials. They took their idea to the school board, the neighborhood association, and eventually the city council. By now, the entire studio had fallen silent. The other contestants, the audience, and even the production crew were captivated by Abigail's story. The remarkable thing is, the adults listened. The city granted us use of the lot. A local business donated materials. Parents and community members volunteered their time. But the students, my students, they designed everything, from the irrigation systems to the planting schedules. Steve's expression showed he was fully invested in the story. So they built a community garden? They built Baltimore's first student-led urban farm, Abigail corrected gently. During Apprentice, they transformed a 10,000-square-foot vacant lot that had been collecting trash for decades into a productive growing space. Last year, they harvested over 2,000 pounds of fresh produce that went directly to families in our community. The audience spontaneously erupted in applause. Steve raised his hand, clearly wanting to hear more. But what struck me the most, Abigail continued when the applause subsided, was what happened beyond the harvest. Students who were chronically absent started coming to school regularly because they needed to tend their plants. Math scores improved because suddenly algebra had real-world applications in calculating growth rates and yields. Reading comprehension increased because they were devouring books and articles about agriculture and nutrition. Steve's trademark composure began to slip as the full impact of Abigail's story sank in. Our science project grew into a business education initiative, Abigail explained. The students established a farmers market where they sell a portion of their harvest to local restaurants, using the profits to sustain and expand the farm. They created educational materials for younger students. They've even started teaching weekend workshops for community members who want to grow food at home. Steve, visibly moved, asked quietly, "And these are middle school students? 13 and 14-year-olds? Yes, Abigail confirmed. The same age group that people often underestimate or dismiss as difficult. What made this possible? Steve asked. Because this doesn't sound like any middle school science class I've ever heard of. Abigail considered the question carefully. I think it's because we stopped treating them like they were just practicing to be adults someday and started treating them like they could make a difference now. They rose to meet that expectation. Steve shook his head in amazement. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just for your community, but for those kids? They did it themselves, Abigail insisted. I just created the space for them to try. No, Steve said firmly. Teachers always say that. But it's not true. You saw possibility where others saw problems. You believed in them when most people would have assigned a worksheet and moved on. The studio remained utterly silent as Steve, normally quick with a joke or transition back to the game, appeared genuinely affected by Abigail's story. After a moment, he looked directly at the camera. We need to take a moment here, he said, his voice slightly unsteady. Because what we're hearing isn't just a nice story about a school project. This is about transformation of students, of a community, and of what we think is possible in education. The executive producer, recognizing the powerful moment unfolding, made an unexpected decision. Through Steve's earpiece came the instruction. "Let's go with this. Ask to see pictures if she has any." Steve nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "Miss Chen, do you happen to have any photos of this farm your students created?" Abigail brightened. "Actually, I do." She reached for her phone. "I always keep these with me because they remind me of what's possible." The production team quickly arranged to display the photos on the studio's large screens. As the images appeared showing a once vacant lot transformed into an organized, thriving urban farm. With students of diverse backgrounds working together, audible gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. The photos told a compelling story. Before and after shots of the lot. Students presenting to the city council. The first harvest. Community members receiving fresh produce. A student-run farmers market. Charts tracking academic improvements correlating with participation in the project. Steve studied each image, his expression a mixture of astonishment and profound respect. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotional weight rarely heard on the typically light-hearted show. "I've been doing television for a long time," he said slowly, "and I've met all kinds of people doing extraordinary things. But what you've done, Miss Chen, what your students have done, this is something special." He turned to address the studio audience. "We're supposed to be playing a game here today. But sometimes, life gives us a moment that's more important than any game." As the impact of Abigail's story settled over the studio, Steve made a decision that broke from the show's standard format. Rather than immediately returning to the game, he asked permission to explore this unexpected revelation further. "Miss Chen, would you be willing to tell us more about your students? Not just the project, but who they are and what challenges they've overcome." Abigail nodded, her eyes reflecting both pride and protective care for her students. "Our school is in one of the most under-resourced areas of Baltimore. Over 85% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. Many face housing insecurity, and some have experienced significant trauma." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But statistics don't capture who they truly are. Darnell, who initially proposed expanding our project, has been taking care of his younger siblings since his mother works 2 jobs. Yasmin, who designed our irrigation system, was previously considered a problem student because she couldn't sit still in traditional classroom settings. Miguel, who manages our seedling nursery, is learning English as his 3rd language after his family relocated from Guatemala." The studio remained silent as Abigail continued. "What makes this project transformative isn't just the food it produces, it's that it gives students agency. They're not just passive recipients of education. They're active problem solvers, making tangible improvements in their community." Steve nodded thoughtfully. "You know, we hear a lot about what's wrong with education today. But this is what's right." He turned to address the studio audience and, by extension, the viewers at home. "Think about what these kids have accomplished. They identified a real problem affecting their community. They researched solutions, developed plans, persuaded adults to support them, and implemented a sustainable project that's feeding people and changing lives." Steve shook his head in amazement. "And they're doing this while still learning algebra and dealing with teenage drama and everything else that comes with being in middle school." The production team, recognizing the powerful television moment unfolding, had made the unprecedented decision to let this conversation play out naturally, even though it meant significantly departing from the planned game format. Steve turned back to Abigail. "What do these kids need? If people watching are inspired by this story, and I can't imagine how they wouldn't be, what would help expand this project or support these students?" Abigail considered the question carefully. The students have created something remarkable with very limited resources. They could expand their impact with better equipment, particularly season-extending technologies like greenhouse materials that would allow year-round growing in Baltimore's climate. Educational opportunities like field trips to agricultural research facilities would broaden their horizons. She paused before adding, "But what they need most is for more people to recognize their potential and take them seriously. These students have proven they can tackle real-world problems when given the chance. They need more opportunities to apply their learning to meaningful challenges." Steve nodded, then made an impromptu decision that would change the course of the show and, potentially, the trajectory of Abigail's project. "Family Feud and I would like to donate $25,000 to support the continued development of your students' urban farm," he announced. The audience erupted in applause as Abigail's family members embraced her, clearly moved by this unexpected development. But Steve wasn't finished. "And I'm personally committing to visit your school and meet these remarkable young people when we film in Baltimore next month." The Chen family's opponents, the Thompsons, had been watching this exchange with evident emotion. Now, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward. "Mr. Harvey," she said, "our family would like to make a request. If we win today, we'd like to donate half of our winnings to Miss Chen's students as well." This unprecedented gesture, contestants offering to share potential winnings with their opponents, moved the studio audience to another round of applause. Steve Harvey, visibly affected, took a moment to compose himself. "In all my years hosting this show, I've never seen anything like this. What started as a simple question about teachers spending their own money has revealed something extraordinary." He turned to address the cameras directly. "We're going to continue our game, because that's what we're here to do. But I want everyone watching to understand that we've witnessed something important today. A reminder of what's possible when we believe in young people's potential, and when dedicated teachers create the conditions for them to thrive." The game resumed with a noticeably breast-a-pace, different energy. Both families played with enthusiasm, but the competitive edge had been replaced by a shared appreciation for what they had just witnessed. When the Chen family ultimately won the round, advancing to Fast Money, the Thompsons cheered for them as genuinely as their own family members did. During Fast Money, Abigail and her husband David represented the Chen family. Their performance was stellar, earning the maximum prize. When Steve announced their victory, he reminded the audience of the Thompsons' generous pledge, which they enthusiastically confirmed despite their loss. As the taping concluded, audience members approached Abigail, many with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of inspirational teachers or asking how they could support similar initiatives in their communities. What had begun as entertainment had transformed into something far more meaningful, a catalyst for connection and action. 6 weeks after the episode aired, Steve Harvey fulfilled his promise to visit Westside Community School in Baltimore. The production team had arranged to document this visit, not as part of Family Feud, but as a special feature about the impact of education and community engagement. The transformation of the vacant lot was even more impressive in person than it had appeared in photos. Neat rows of vegetables stretched across what had once been neglected urban space. An irrigation system, cleverly designed to capture and distribute rainwater, threaded through the garden beds. A small greenhouse, constructed partially from repurposed materials, housed seedlings at one end of the property. A hand-painted sign proclaiming, "Westside Community Farm, growing food, growing minds," welcomed visitors at the entrance. But most remarkable were the students themselves. Far from the stereotypical image of disengaged teenagers, Abigail's students were articulate, knowledgeable, and visibly proud as they guided Steve through their creation. They explained the science behind their growing methods, the mathematics of their yield calculations, and the business model they had developed to sustain their work. Darnell, the student who had initially proposed expanding beyond the classroom, had emerged as a natural leader. "Before this project, I didn't really see the point of school," he told Steve candidly. "It felt disconnected from real life. Now I understand why we learn algebra and biology and even public speaking. They're tools we can use to solve real problems." Yasmin, once labeled disruptive for her inability to sit still in traditional classes, flourished in the active learning environment of the farm. "Miss Chen was the first teacher who didn't try to make me be quiet and still all the time," she explained. "She found ways for me to use my energy productively. Now I'm thinking about becoming an agricultural engineer." Miguel, who had been learning English as his third language, had found that the hands-on nature of the project accelerated his language acquisition. When we write our business plans or present to community groups, I'm not just learning English from a textbook, he explained. I'm using it for something important. The visit had been scheduled to coincide with a community harvest day, when neighborhood residents could come to receive fresh produce. Steve witnessed firsthand how the project had become a source of neighborhood pride and connection. Elderly residents chatted with students as they selected vegetables. Parents brought younger children to learn about where food comes from. Local restaurateurs discussed specialty crops with the student business team. During a quiet moment, Steve spoke with Abigail about the changes she had observed since their Family Feud appearance had aired. It's been remarkable, she acknowledged. The financial support has allowed us to expand the growing area and extend our season with the greenhouse. But the recognition itself has been just as valuable. My students were invited to present at a national education conference. The school district is looking at how to replicate elements of our program in other schools. And the students themselves? Steve asked. Abigail smiled. That's where the real transformation continues. Their academic performance has improved across subjects, not because we're teaching to tests, but because they're applying knowledge to meaningful work. Attendance rates have increased. Disciplinary issues have decreased. She looked across the farm, where students were engaged in various tasks, working with confidence and purpose. But the most significant change is harder to measure. They see themselves differently now as capable, as problem solvers, as contributors to their community. That sense of agency and purpose, that's what education should provide. Steve nodded thoughtfully. You know, we see a lot of negative headlines about young people today. About their screen time, their shortened attention spans, their disconnection from community. But what I'm seeing here tells a different story. The potential has always been there, Abigail replied. Young people are naturally curious and idealistic. They want to make a difference. Too often, we underestimate them or fail to provide meaningful outlets for their energy and creativity. As the community harvest day continued around them, Steve reflected on what he was witnessing. This goes beyond education, doesn't it? This is about how we view young people, especially those from under-resourced communities. It's about the opportunities we provide or don't provide. Exactly, Abigail agreed. Every community has challenges, but every community also has assets and strengths. These students are proving that young people can be part of the solution when we create the conditions for them to contribute meaningfully. The special feature concluded with a community dinner prepared with produce from the urban farm. Students, parents, teachers, and neighbors shared a meal together at long tables set up adjacent to the growing space. The scene embodied what the project had ultimately created. Not just food security, but community connection and a renewed sense of possibility. In his closing remarks to the camera, Steve Harvey reflected on what he had witnessed. When I first heard Abigail Chen's story on Family Feud, I was stunned by what she and her students had accomplished. Being here today, seeing it firsthand, I'm even more impressed. He gestured toward the thriving garden and the community gathered around it. What began as a science lesson has become a model for what education can be connected to real-world challenges, responsive to community needs, and centered on students' capacity to make meaningful contributions. Steve continued. As adults, we often underestimate young people. We focus on preparing them for some future time when they'll be ready to make a difference. What this project proves is that they're ready now. They just need the opportunity and support to apply their energy and ideas to real problems. The camera panned across the urban farm one final time as Steve concluded. In a world facing serious challenges from food insecurity to climate change to social division, we need all hands on deck. The students of Westside Community School remind us that some of our most powerful change agents are sitting in classrooms right now, waiting for their chance to build a better world. The special ended with a simple message. To support similar initiatives in schools across America, visit westsidefarm.org for resources, curriculum guides, and connection opportunities. What had begun as an unexpected moment on a game show had evolved into something far more significant. a catalyst for conversation about the purpose of education and the potential of young people to address real-world challenges. And it had all started because one teacher believed her students could make a difference. And one game show host took the time to listen. If you were inspired by this story about the incredible impact teachers and students can have when they work together to solve real problems, please like and subscribe for more content that highlights the extraordinary moments happening in classrooms across America. Sometimes the most powerful educational innovations aren't found in policy documents or testing strategies. They're growing in school gardens, community projects, and the untapped potential of young minds.